It was supposed to be a celebration. The kind of evening where you're surrounded by people you love, everyone laughing and chatting with the soft hum of music floating in the air. But then, things changed. Tasha had been preparing for this moment for months, but she never imagined it would all come crashing down like this. The garden was gorgeous, just like she had envisioned, string lights twinkling above, casting a warm glow over the white tables, the kind of setup that looked like something out of a dream. The air smelled like fresh flowers and the evening sun hung low, casting long shadows across the grass. Her 3 kids, Jada, Kayla, and Mia, were running around in matching yellow dresses, their laughter ringing out like pure joy. Tasha watched them for a moment, her heart softening as it always did when she looked at her girls. But she couldn't fully relax. She had been waiting for this day, and even though everything looked perfect, she could feel the storm building up inside her. Her husband, Malcolm, walked in late, not just a little late, but the kind of late that made a statement. He strolled through the gate, phone in hand, barely looking up. He didn't come to Tasha first. He walked straight to his mom, Claire, who was already standing near the entrance, looking like she was about to take over the world. Claire was tall and imposing, always standing with that aura of someone who had mastered control. Malcolm whispered something to Claire and they shared a knowing glance. That was when Tasha felt the first pang of unease. She didn't react right away, she never did, she was quiet, measured. But she was also paying attention, and she had learned long ago that when people were too comfortable, that's when things got dangerous. Tasha took another sip of her lemonade, trying to distract herself from the tension that was slowly creeping in. As Malcolm and his friend Marcus found a corner of the yard to chat, Tasha noticed someone new entering the garden. A woman she didn't recognize. Her name was Simone. She was dressed up like she was ready for a runway show, clearly trying to make an impression. But Malcolm saw her and waved her over like she was the guest of honor. Simone smiled sweetly, but Tasha could tell there was something off about her. No one had invited Simone. She didn't belong here, but she moved through the crowd like she had every right to be there. Tasha didn't show anything on her face, but her insides were on fire. She set her cup down, walked over to check on the girls, and made sure Mia's bow was tied properly. She was trying to hold it together. She didn't want to make a scene, but she could feel it, the quiet storm brewing under the surface. The one she had been waiting for, the one that was coming whether she was ready or not. Tasha wasn't one to raise her voice. She never needed to. She had always been quiet, the kind of person who watched more than she spoke. Some people might have called it shy, but it wasn't that. She wasn't shy, she just knew that some things didn't need to be said out loud. People always misunderstood that about her. They thought her silence meant she didn't have a voice, when in fact it was the complete opposite. Her silence was her strength. She stood at the edge of the garden, watching everything unfold. Her girls were still running around, their carefree laughter filling the air, but Tasha's mind was elsewhere. She could feel it. The tension was thick, heavy in the air, like a storm cloud waiting to break. She could hear the faint sound of conversations happening around her, but she wasn't really listening. Her focus was on the scene in front of her. Malcolm and Simone were deep in conversation now. She couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but she didn't need to. She knew enough to see the way he looked at her. The way his attention kept drifting towards Simone like he couldn't help himself. It was a look she knew too well, and it sent a sharp pang through her chest. Tasha had always been there for him, always. She had been there when things were hard, when life knocked them down, when everything felt uncertain. And now, it seemed like he was forgetting all of that. She had seen the signs before, the little things, the way he had started pulling away. Late nights at work, early mornings with his phone glued to his hand. He'd stopped talking to her the way he used to, the way they used to laugh over nothing and share their thoughts. Now it was just silence between them, filled with unspoken words and growing distance. But she wasn't the type to confront him. Not yet, at least. Tasha wasn't the type to cause a scene. She knew how to keep her composure, even when everything inside her was screaming. She had learned that from her mom. She had learned to hold it all in, to stay calm even when things were falling apart. That's when Claire stood up. Her voice cut through the chatter like a knife. She didn't ask for attention, she just took it. With one swift motion, Claire tapped her glass with a spoon, and the conversation around them died. People turned to look, the entire garden now silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire began, her voice smooth but carrying, "I've been quiet for far too long. But today, on my daughter-in-law's birthday, I feel it's time to speak the truth. Tasha froze. The weight of Claire's words hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, but she refused to look up. She wasn't going to give Claire the satisfaction of seeing her react. Instead, she stood tall, trying to hold it together, even though her heart was racing. Claire continued, "I've watched my son Malcolm give 20 years of his life to a woman who never deserved him. And I've stayed silent for far too long out of respect for this marriage, but enough is enough. Tasha, you've always known that you weren't the one for him. A real wife would have stepped aside long ago." Tasha's heart sank. The crowd was quiet now, hanging on every word. She could feel the eyes on her, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. She didn't care. She had dealt with worse before, but this was different. Claire wasn't done. Malcolm deserves better. He deserves someone who understands him, someone who doesn't come from nothing, someone who belongs with him. The words stung, but Tasha didn't flinch. She had been through worse. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was the calm before the storm. The kind of calm that always came before she made her move. Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. She walked slowly across the garden, her posture perfect, every step deliberate. She set it down on the table right next to the untouched birthday cake. "Consider this a gift," Claire said, her voice sharp and cold. Tasha stood there, her daughters at her side. She felt their little hands reach for hers, their confusion written all over their faces. The silence between them felt heavy, suffocating. Tasha wanted to say something, anything, to make it better, but she didn't. Instead, she wiped the tears from Mia's face, gently brushing them away with her thumb. Her gaze moved from the envelope to Malcolm. His eyes were still on the ground and his lips were pressed tight. He said nothing. Tasha nodded once, slowly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't defeat, it wasn't surrender, it was understanding. She had known this moment was coming, and now it was here. The evening continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. What was supposed to be a joyous celebration now felt like a tense, waiting game. Tasha stood there, her hand still on Mia's shoulder, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She didn't make a scene, she never did. But the knot in her stomach twisted tighter with every passing minute. Her daughters were too young to fully understand what had just occurred, but they could feel the shift in the air. They were quiet now, their once carefree laughter replaced with the stillness that only children know when something isn't right. Tasha tried to be present for them, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Claire's words, that envelope sitting on the table, the coldness of Malcolm's silence. She could feel her chest tighten with every breath. She didn't know how much longer she could hold it together, but she had to, for them, for her daughters. The party, once full of energy, now felt distant. People whispered among themselves, casting glances at Tasha. Some were sympathetic, others were uncomfortable, unsure of how to act. The music had stopped, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone was too busy pretending that nothing had changed, when in reality everything had. Malcolm was still standing by the fence, his back turned to her like he couldn't even bring himself to face her. She caught sight of him glancing over at Simone, who was laughing a little too loudly, drawing attention to herself. Tasha knew that look in his eyes. It was the same one he'd had when he was first falling for her, excited, carefree, full of promise. But that was a long time ago, and it wasn't the same anymore. He had become a stranger to her, a person she barely recognized. And now, standing in the garden, she realized something. It wasn't just him who had changed. She had changed too. Tasha's gaze fell back on the envelope, the sealed letter that Claire had placed so deliberately on the table. It sat there like a challenge, mocking her calm demeanor, but Tasha wasn't about to play into it, not now. Not after everything she had built, everything she had endured. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to her grandmother Loretta, who had raised her with a quiet strength. Loretta had always told her, "Patience, baby. The world may move fast, but you don't have to let them rush, you wait for your moment." Tasha had learned that lesson well. She had waited quietly, patiently, and now her moment was coming. As the evening wore on, the tension in the garden began to feel unbearable. The guests, once engaged in lively conversations, were now just going through the motions. Everyone was pretending to enjoy themselves, but it was clear that something had broken. Tasha's heart wasn't broken, it was simply tired. Tired of pretending that this life, this marriage, was still what it once had been. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. She wasn't ready to let everything crumble without a fight. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the envelope once more. She wasn't going to let them make her feel small. She wasn't going to let them think they could control her, that they could strip away everything she had worked for. She had built something bigger than this, bigger than all of them. The party slowly started to wind down, but Tasha didn't feel the need to leave. She wasn't going anywhere, not yet, not when she knew the game wasn't over. Her girls were still playing, oblivious to the storm that had just swept through their lives. Tasha smiled softly as she watched them. For them, she would hold it together. For them, she would wait. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days after the party passed in a blur, the weight of Claire's words still hanging heavily over everything. Tasha went through the motions, making meals, taking care of the girls, handling the day-to-day. But inside, she was a storm quietly brewing. She had always been the steady one, the one who held it all together, never letting anyone see what she was really thinking. But now she could feel the shift. Malcolm barely spoke to her. When he came home at night, he was distant, like a stranger in his own house. He sat at the dinner table, his phone glued to his hand, his mind clearly elsewhere. Tasha had seen it before, the way his attention drifted. It had started with little things, a glance here, a longer silence there, but now it was undeniable. He wasn't just physically absent, he was emotionally gone. Tasha tried to reach out, tried to spark a conversation, but it was like talking to a wall. His responses were short, distracted. And the worst part, he wasn't even pretending to care anymore. The way he used to look at her like she was everything had disappeared. In its place was something colder, something more distant. One evening, after dinner, as the girls were getting ready for bed, Tasha sat on the couch, her mind racing. She hadn't told anyone the full truth, not even her best friend, Mia. Not about how she'd been feeling, not about how she had known for a long time that things weren't right. But something inside her told her it was time to face it. She couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep carrying this weight on her shoulders alone. She reached for her phone, dialing the one number she had been avoiding for months. Mia picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but with a note of concern. "Hey girl, how's it going?" Tasha paused for a moment. She hated sounding weak, hated admitting that things weren't perfect, but she needed to say it. She needed someone to understand. It's not good, Mia," she said softly, her voice cracking just a little. "Malcolm, he's checked out. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Mia was silent for a beat before responding, her voice low but firm. "You've been holding it together for so long, Tasha, but you can't keep carrying all of this on your own. You deserve better than this." Tasha closed her eyes, letting Mia's words sink in. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear it until now. For so long, she had told herself that everything would work out, that if she just stayed calm, stayed patient, things would get better. But deep down, she knew that waiting wasn't going to change anything. "I'm just so tired, Mia," she whispered. "I've done everything for him, for this family, and now it feels like it's all slipping away, like I don't even recognize him anymore." Mia sighed. "You can't control him, Tasha. You can't make someone love you the way you love them. You've got to think about what's best for you and the girls." Tasha leaned back against the couch, her heart heavy. She knew Mia was right. She had been holding on for so long, hoping that things would turn around, hoping that maybe, just maybe, things would go back to how they were. But they wouldn't, they couldn't. The conversation ended with promises to talk soon, but Tasha's mind was already spinning. She had been so focused on keeping everything together that she had forgotten to take care of herself. She had forgotten to ask what she needed, what she deserved. The next day, after the girls left for school, Tasha sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the empty space around her. The house was quiet, too quiet. She knew what she had to do, she had known for a while. Malcolm hadn't said anything about the envelope from the party, but that didn't matter anymore. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He had made his choice, and now she had to make hers. With a deep breath, Tasha stood up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out the letter that had been sitting there since the night of the party. It was still sealed, untouched, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Tasha spent the next few days in a kind of quiet determination. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since the party was slowly starting to lift. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but she felt the shift inside her. She had waited long enough. She was done being silent, done letting everything happen around her while she stood by, holding it all together. Malcolm continued to pull away. It was almost as if he was expecting her to make the first move, to call him out, to demand answers. But Tasha wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. She had played her part long enough, silently holding the family together while he drifted further away. Now, it was his turn to deal with the consequences of his actions. The days felt long and heavy, but Tasha remained calm, her mind racing with the possibilities of what would come next. She hadn't told her daughters about the tension between her and Malcolm, not yet, at least. They were still too young to fully understand, and Tasha wasn't ready to shatter their sense of security. But she knew that things couldn't go on like this for much longer. One evening, as the girls were finishing dinner, Tasha stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The soft light of the setting sun bathed the room in golden warmth, but inside she could feel the coldness creeping in. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it together. Just as she turned away from the window, she heard the front door open. Malcolm had come home late again, as usual. This time he didn't even acknowledge her presence. He didn't ask about the girls, didn't offer a greeting. He just walked straight to his study, shutting the door behind him. Tasha could feel the familiar sting of frustration and disappointment, but she didn't let it show. She wasn't going to play his game anymore. She had spent too long waiting for him to come around, hoping he would see the truth. But the truth was right in front of him, and he refused to face it. The following morning, as the girls got ready for school, Tasha knew it was time to confront him. She couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. She had to draw the line. When Malcolm finally emerged from his study, Tasha was already waiting for him. She stood in the living room, her posture calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. She wasn't going to back down this time. "Malcolm," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk." He looked up, surprised by the firmness in her tone. "About what?" he asked, his voice guarded, like he was already preparing for a confrontation. Tasha didn't hesitate. "About everything, about how we're living in this house like we're strangers to each other. About how you've been pulling away for months, about the way you've been treating me and the girls." Malcolm's face tightened and he opened his mouth to respond, but Tasha held up her hand. "No, Malcolm, I've been quiet for long enough. I've let you do whatever you want, ignore me, ignore the family, but I'm done. I'm done waiting for you to wake up. I've been carrying everything on my shoulders while you've checked out. I'm not doing it anymore." She paused, watching the shock flicker across his face. She could tell that he hadn't expected this, that he thought she would just go along with it like she always had. "I've been patient, I've been strong, and I've been silent," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "But this is where I draw the line. I deserve more than this. I deserve a partner who respects me, who values me, who shows up for this family. And right now, you're none of those things." Malcolm stood there, silent. His face was unreadable, but Tasha could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew she was right, but he wasn't ready to admit it. He had never been good at owning up to his mistakes, and now it was too late. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Tasha wasn't going to break it. She wasn't going to let him turn this around and make it about her. Finally, Malcolm spoke, his voice low. "What do you want from me, Tasha? I didn't ask for any of this." Tasha took a deep breath. She had already made her decision. "I want the truth, I want honesty, and I want you to make a choice. Because this isn't working. You're either in this marriage or you're not, but you can't keep pretending." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For the first time in a long while, Tasha felt the control slip from her hands. She had said what needed to be said. She had drawn her line in the sand. Now it was up to him to decide which side he wanted to be on. Malcolm stood frozen for a moment, his jaw clenched as he processed her words. Tasha watched him carefully, but she didn't flinch. She had said what needed to be said. The ball was now in his court. He had to make a choice. She wasn't going to beg for his attention or fight for something that had already been slowly dying. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of the girls playing in the backyard, it all seemed so far away. Tasha's heart beat steady in her chest, but she was no longer afraid to face the truth. It was time for him to see it too. Finally, Malcolm spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you want from me, Tasha. This is all too much. You've been acting like everything's fine when we both know it's not." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "You mean to tell me that you haven't noticed, that you haven't felt it?" This whole time you've been ignoring everything. Us, our family, me. Her voice didn't shake. She'd practiced being calm in these moments, but her words landed sharp and clear. He scoffed. I didn't ignore you, I just didn't know what to do. What do you want from me, huh? You think this is easy for me? I'm not asking you to make it easy. I'm asking you to show up, she replied, her voice still steady but growing firmer. We've been on different paths for a while now, Malcolm, and I'm not waiting around for you to figure it out. He opened his mouth to say something, but his words trailed off. The truth was right there in the air between them. He knew she was right. He had known for months, maybe even longer. But he hadn't been ready to admit it, not to her, not to himself. The guilt was settling in now, a bitter weight he could no longer ignore. His mind raced back to the first signs, how he'd come home late, how he'd stopped really talking to her, how he'd started seeing Simone more than just a colleague. There had been small moments, small choices that led him here, and he had been too stubborn, too prideful to address them. He had been hoping it would fix itself, that Tasha would just keep going as she always had, quietly carrying everything on her shoulders while he lived in his own mess. But now, everything had cracked open. And there was no hiding it anymore. Malcolm looked down, his shoulders sagging slightly as he let out a long breath. I never wanted to hurt you, Tasha. I got lost somewhere along the way. I don't know how we got here. Tasha didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch again, not because she was unsure, but because she was letting it sink in for him. She had been carrying this burden for too long. He needed to understand how deep the cracks had gone. You were never supposed to be here, Malcolm, Tasha said quietly, but the weight of her words was clear. I loved you, I still do, in some way. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm not just going to sit by while you pull away from us. I've already given everything to this marriage, to you. And right now, that's not enough. He didn't argue, he couldn't. The truth was too loud, too clear. He had failed, and he had failed her, his wife, the mother of his children. Malcolm turned away, pacing across the room like he was searching for something to say, something to fix this, but the words never came. Tasha stood still, watching him, feeling the weight of everything she had carried slowly starting to lift. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from her best friend, Mia. You good? Tasha glanced at it but didn't respond. It was a small comfort knowing Mia was there, but it didn't change what needed to happen. Tasha had made her peace. She wasn't turning back. Malcolm finally stopped pacing and met her eyes. So what now? His voice was small now, the bravado he had been carrying for months gone. Tasha took a deep breath. She didn't want to make this decision, didn't want to have to be the one to say the words, but she knew she had to. We have to figure out what comes next for us, for the girls. There was no more pretending, no more running. Whatever happened next, it wasn't going to be about saving something that had already fallen apart. It was about moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in ages: freedom. The following days were a blur. Malcolm wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was Tasha. She couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had cracked wide open, but in a strange way it didn't feel like breaking, it felt like finally letting go. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of family life, laughter, chatter, the hustle and bustle of getting kids ready for school was now eerily quiet. It wasn't a sad kind of silence, though. It was the kind of silence that comes when you're no longer pretending, no longer forcing a situation to fit into the mold you've created for it. It was a relief, even if it still stung. Malcolm, on the other hand, had gone into a kind of shell-shocked silence. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way she had expected. He was lost. He didn't know what to do with himself now that everything he had taken for granted was slipping away. The life he thought he had built was disintegrating before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Tasha wasn't angry either, not anymore. The anger had burned out long ago, replaced by something else, something quieter, more determined. She had always known that she was strong. She had always known that she could handle things on her own. But now she had to prove it to herself more than anyone else. The girls didn't know the full story, of course. Tasha wasn't about to lay all of this on them. They were still too young to understand the nuances of adult relationships, and Tasha wasn't ready to burden them with the complexity of what was happening. But they could feel the tension. They could sense the shift in the air. They had been used to the way things were, the way their dad would come home late, distracted, barely engaged. but now even they could see that something was wrong. One evening, as Tasha was tucking Mia into bed, her youngest daughter looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. "Mom," Mia said quietly, "are you and Dad okay?" Tasha's heart clenched at the question. She had been expecting it, but that didn't make it any easier. She smiled softly, brushing a strand of Mia's hair out of her face. "We're okay, sweetie," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Things are just a little different right now, but everything's going to be fine." Mia looked at her skeptically, clearly not convinced, but she didn't press. Tasha could see the worry in her eyes, but she also saw the trust. Her girls trusted her to hold everything together to make sure they were okay, and Tasha was determined not to let them down. The next morning, as Tasha was preparing breakfast, she saw Malcolm standing in the kitchen, his back to her. He didn't even look up as she entered, and for a brief moment the air between them felt thick again. But this time there was no anger, no accusations, just a silence that said more than words ever could. "Malcolm," Tasha said quietly, breaking the stillness. He turned, his face tired, the weight of everything he had been avoiding written clearly in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice low, "and I get it, I do. I've been a mess, but I don't know how to fix this, I don't know how to get us back." Tasha took a deep breath, her mind racing. She didn't want to keep going in circles. She didn't want empty promises or apologies that wouldn't stick. "Malcolm," she said firmly, her voice stronger now, "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm not asking you to be the person you used to be. I'm asking you to take responsibility for what's happened, for where we are now." Malcolm's face twisted in confusion. "But what does that mean, Tasha? Are we done? Are we ending this?" Tasha met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. I don't know if this is the end or if this is just the beginning of something else. But I do know that we can't keep pretending, we can't keep living like this." The words were out, and Tasha felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would take her, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't scared of walking it alone. She had been alone in so many ways for so long that the thought of it didn't seem so daunting anymore. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, then he sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't know what to do, Tasha, I wish I could change things." "You can change things," Tasha replied, her voice softening. "But it's up to you, you have to decide if you're in this or if you're not. But I can't keep holding onto something that isn't there." He didn't say anything else, he just turned, walking out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floors. Tasha stood there for a moment, her heart racing. She didn't know what the future held, but she was done waiting for someone else to decide it for her. She wasn't going to be the one stuck in a holding pattern anymore. She had her daughters, she had herself, and that was enough. The days that followed were filled with a strange calm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a quiet that felt different. Tasha went about her life, caring for the girls, managing the house, but she did it all with a kind of focus she hadn't felt in a long time. There was no more waiting for Malcolm to fix things, no more hoping he'd come around and suddenly be the man she needed. The reality was harsh, but it was also liberating. She had been waiting for him to choose her, to see her the way she needed to be seen, but the truth was, she had been choosing him for too long. She had put everything she had into their life together, into their family, and now it was time to shift her focus. Time to choose herself. The girls seemed to sense the change, too. There was still some uncertainty in their eyes, but it wasn't the same kind of fear they'd had in the days following the party. They were starting to adapt to the new normal, and for the first time in a while, Tasha saw a glimmer of hope in their faces. They trusted her, they knew she would protect them no matter what. Malcolm hadn't spoken to her much since their conversation in the kitchen. He was still around, still present in the house, but it was clear he was struggling. She could see it in his eyes when their paths crossed. He had wanted to fix everything, but he didn't know how. And in a way, that was the hardest part, to realize that he wasn't going to change unless he was ready to face his own mistakes, something he wasn't willing to do yet. Tasha wasn't waiting for him anymore. One afternoon, while the girls were out at a friend's house, Tasha sat down at the kitchen table, the letter from the party still sitting there. It was strange, almost surreal, that it had come to this point. That letter had been the catalyst, the moment that had set everything in motion. It was just an envelope, a small piece of paper. But it had shattered everything she thought she knew about her marriage, about her life. She picked it up slowly, staring at the seal for a moment. The words written on the front seemed to mock her. Consider this a gift. Tasha's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal, pulling the letter free. As she unfolded the paper, her eyes scanned the neatly typed words, words that in the moment of their delivery had seemed so final, so damning. But now they didn't carry the weight they once had. It was a letter of divorce. A formal statement from Malcolm's lawyer outlining everything: his assets, her rights, their shared property. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the final confirmation of what Tasha had already known. She stared at the letter for a long time, her thoughts swirling. A divorce. The end of everything she had worked so hard to build. The end of the family she had once dreamed of, but it didn't feel like defeat. No, it felt like the end of an era, the end of living in someone else's shadow, the end of living for someone else's idea of happiness. Tasha folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, setting it aside. She wasn't going to let it define her. It was just paper. She was the one who had the power now. She was the one who was going to decide how the rest of her life played out. She knew she had a long road ahead. The girls still needed stability, and she needed to rebuild not just her life but herself. But she was ready. Ready to take back the control she had given away for so long. Ready to be the woman she knew she could be: strong, independent, and free. Later that evening, when the girls came home, Tasha smiled at them as they ran through the door. They were full of energy, talking over each other, telling her about their day. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again, and in that moment, Tasha realized something. She hadn't lost anything. She had everything she needed right here in this house with her girls, and that was enough. The days after the letter were different, not drastically so, but enough to notice. There was a shift in the house, something unspoken but deeply felt. Tasha had made her decision, and even though nothing on the surface had changed, she felt lighter, freer. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was living for herself, not waiting for someone else to decide her fate. Malcolm had moved into the guest room. He didn't speak much, except for the occasional comment when he passed her in the hallway or when they exchanged a few words over dinner. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. But Tasha wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't looking for signs of hope or waiting for him to change. He was where he was, and she was where she needed to be, focusing on her daughters, on herself, and on what came next. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Tasha sat down at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her. It was late, too late to be thinking clearly, but her mind was buzzing with thoughts, with plans. She had been quiet for so long, waiting for the world to catch up to her, but now she was ready to make her move. She grabbed her phone and called Mia. The line rang twice before her friend picked up. "Hey, Tasha. You okay?" Mia's voice was always soothing, a steady anchor in the chaos of Tasha's life. "Yeah, I'm good," Tasha replied, her tone soft but resolute. "I've just been thinking a lot, about everything." "About what comes next?" Mia paused. "I've been waiting for this conversation, so what are you thinking?" Tasha let out a slow breath. "I'm thinking it's time to start over. I need to get my life back. Not for him, not for anyone else, just for me. I've spent so much time trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I've forgotten who I am in the process." Mia's voice was quiet but full of understanding. "I get it, girl. So, what's the plan?" Tasha smiled, the first real smile she had felt in a long time. "The plan: to take control again, to build something just for me, to stop letting other people decide my happiness. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I'm done waiting." There was a pause on the other end. Tasha could almost hear Mia nodding, as if she were there, sitting across the table from her, sharing the moment. "You've got this," Mia said softly. "You've always had it in you, and now you're ready to step into it." Tasha closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that until now. "Thanks, Mia. I think I just needed to hear it from someone else." The conversation drifted into other topics, but Tasha's mind stayed focused. She didn't know what the future held, but she was finally ready to step into it. There were so many possibilities, so many things she had pushed aside. But now she wasn't afraid anymore. She had her girls, she had herself, and that was enough. The next morning, after the girls had left for school, Tasha sat in the living room making a list of what needed to change. It wasn't a long list, but it was everything that mattered. The first thing on the list: take care of herself. For so long, she had put herself last, but that was going to change. She wasn't going to be the one who always gave and gave without receiving. She was going to put her own dreams, her own needs front and center. And as she wrote down her plans, she realized something. This was her chance. The chance she had been waiting for without even knowing it. Her life wasn't over, it was just beginning. The weeks that followed were filled with small but significant changes. Tasha wasn't in a hurry. For once, she wasn't rushing to get to the next thing. She had learned to be present, to savor the small moments. She spent more time with her girls, listening to their stories, helping them with homework, enjoying the little things that she had often taken for granted. Malcolm was still there, but he was becoming more and more of a shadow in the background. He'd started going out more, spending longer hours at work, or simply retreating into the guest room. Tasha didn't have the energy to worry about him anymore. She had her own path to follow, and it didn't include waiting for him to decide to join her. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had settled into something familiar, like a quiet truce. They spoke when necessary, but there were no more fights, no more arguing about what was or wasn't working. They both knew the score. Tasha didn't need Malcolm's approval or validation anymore. She was building something on her own now. One day, as the girls were out playing, Tasha sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. She had been thinking about the future, about what she wanted for herself. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to dream, to think about what she truly wanted. But now, the possibilities felt endless. She had always been good at managing things, keeping track of details, organizing. It was time to use those skills for herself. She had been so focused on keeping the family together, making everything work for everyone else, that she had forgotten her own passions. But now, she was ready to take those first steps toward building something just for her. Tasha opened a new document and typed the first words of what would become her new business plan. It wasn't much yet, just a few scribbled ideas, but it was something. It was hers, and that was enough. She wanted to start her own consulting firm, focused on helping women like her, women who had been stuck, who had put everyone else's needs before their own. She wanted to help them build their confidence, their independence, and their success. She had the skills, the experience, and now, the drive. As she typed, Tasha felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, she knew exactly where she was headed. It wasn't about fixing her marriage. It wasn't about trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed. It was about moving forward, creating a future that was built on her own terms. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Tasha sat in the living room looking out the window at the darkening sky. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful. She didn't need anyone to complete her. She was complete on her own. Malcolm came out of his room, his footsteps light on the hardwood floor. He paused when he saw her, his face shadowed in the dim light. "You working?" he asked, his voice unsure. Tasha looked up and nodded. "Yeah, just getting some things down, figuring out what comes next." He hesitated before stepping into the room. I don't know what to say, Tasha. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it." Tasha met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "Malcolm, I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm not asking for anything anymore. I've done everything I can. I've been the one holding everything together for so long, and now it's my turn." He nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I get it. I know I lost you." "I don't blame you." Tasha stood up and walked over to him, her hand briefly resting on his arm. "You didn't lose me, Malcolm. I'm still here, but I'm not the same person I was. I can't be." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, letting the words sink in. Tasha turned away, her heart heavy but resolute. This was the moment she had been building up to for so long. She had chosen herself, and that was something she would never regret. The next day, Tasha called Mia to share her idea. As soon as Mia picked up, Tasha couldn't contain her excitement. "I'm doing it. I'm starting my business." Mia's voice was full of enthusiasm. "Tasha, that's amazing. I knew you had it in you. You've always been capable of more than you realized." Tasha smiled, feeling the weight of the decision lifting. "It's time, Mia, time to stop holding back. Time to stop letting other people decide what I can do." Tasha spent the next few weeks turning her ideas into action. The excitement she had felt when she first started planning her business began to transform into real momentum. She'd been carrying this dream with her for so long, but now it wasn't just a dream, it was becoming a reality. She enrolled in a few online courses, attended webinars, and reached out to people who had been in the business longer than she had. She spent hours researching, learning the ins and outs of entrepreneurship. Every late night spent working on her laptop felt like progress, even when the results weren't immediate. Malcolm had, for the most part, kept his distance. He was still in the guest room, still distant, though there was a quiet understanding between them now. He didn't try to fix things, and Tasha didn't expect him to. They had reached a kind of unspoken truce. He was beginning to realize that he couldn't fix their marriage, not now and maybe not ever. But Tasha wasn't waiting for him anymore. She was building something of her own, something no one could take from her. One afternoon, while the girls were at school, Tasha sat at her desk reviewing the business plan she'd been working on. She had a name for it: empowerment consulting. Simple, yet powerful. It wasn't just about giving advice, it was about helping women find their own strength, build their own businesses, and take control of their futures. As she worked, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia. "How's it going?" "I'm so proud of you," Tasha smiled and quickly typed back. "It's going, slowly but surely. I'm taking things one step at a time." The message that followed made her pause. "You're doing it. One step at a time is all it takes. You've got this." Tasha sat back in her chair, staring at her phone. Mia's words meant more than she realized. She wasn't just moving forward for herself, she was moving forward for the women she wanted to help. She wanted to be the support that Mia had been for her, the person who believed in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. That evening, after dinner, Tasha sat with the girls as they worked on their homework. It was a quiet night, the soft hum of their pencils scratching against paper filling the air. Tasha glanced over at them, her heart swelling with love. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't waiting for someone else to decide her future. She was taking control, one small step at a time. Later that night, after she had tucked the girls into bed, Tasha sat down in the living room. She felt a little more settled than she had in weeks, a little more at peace. Malcolm came out of the guest room then, his steps hesitant. He looked at her, his expression softer than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice quiet, "about what you said, about what's happening." Tasha didn't look at him immediately. She had learned that silence was sometimes the best response. She kept her focus on the book she was reading, but she was listening. "I know I've messed things up," Malcolm continued. "And I know you're doing this for yourself, not for me, but I need you to know, I respect what you're doing. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I've never seen you like this." Tasha's fingers froze on the pages of her book, but she didn't look up. "Thank you," she said simply. He stood there for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. "I don't know what happens next, Tasha. I don't know if we can fix this, but I want you to know that I see you now. I see what you've been doing, what you're building. I never saw it before." Tasha finally looked up at him, her face calm but firm. "That's the point, Malcolm. You should have seen me, but I don't need you to see me anymore. I see myself." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment it felt like the weight of years of disappointment had finally been acknowledged. He nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, before turning and walking back into the guest room. Tasha sat there for a long time, the room filled with the quiet hum of her own thoughts. She hadn't expected an apology, and she hadn't expected Malcolm to fix everything. But this was enough. This acknowledgement, this small shift, it was something she had needed to hear. She wasn't waiting for him to change anymore. But hearing that he saw her, truly saw her, made something inside her settle. She wasn't alone in this journey, not anymore. A few months passed and the house settled into a new rhythm. Tasha had fully thrown herself into her work, building empowerment consulting from the ground up. She wasn't in a rush. Everything she had done so far had been slow, deliberate, and thoughtful. Every decision was calculated, every step intentional. She was learning, growing, and most importantly, she was believing in herself again. Malcolm had continued his distance, moving through the house like a silent roommate. He was still there, but he wasn't really there. The strain of their marriage had been stripped away to bare, raw truth, and now they simply coexisted. There were no more false hopes, no more pretending. They both knew where they stood, and neither of them had made a move to change that. The girls seemed happier too. They noticed the change in their mother, the quiet confidence she carried now. They were still adjusting to the idea of their parents not being together the way they used to be, but they weren't afraid. Tasha made sure they understood that no matter what happened, they were safe. They were loved. One Saturday afternoon, after a busy week of meetings and work, Tasha took the girls to the park. She sat on the bench, watching them play together, laughing and chasing each other around. The world felt full again. For the first time in months, Tasha felt at peace. There was no tension hanging over her, no worry about what would happen next. She had stepped into her life, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for anything to happen. She was making it happen. Malcolm called later that evening. He had been avoiding conversations about their future, avoiding any talk about what came next. But tonight, something was different. His voice was hesitant, unsure. "Tasha," he began, "I've been thinking about everything, about the way things have turned out." Tasha leaned back against the couch, her heart steady. She had been expecting this, had been waiting for this moment to come, but she wasn't anxious. She didn't need his approval, his validation. She had already made her peace with what was happening. "I'm listening," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know I've been distant," Malcolm continued. "And I know I haven't been the man I should have been, but I want you to know something. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for not seeing you. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for." Tasha closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. This wasn't the grand apology she had once hoped for, but it was enough. It was a step in the right direction. "I appreciate that, Malcolm," she said quietly. "But the truth is, I've been waiting for you to see me for too long. I don't need you to fix it anymore. I've fixed myself." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a deep breath. "I know," he said finally. "I know, and I don't think I can fix us. But I hope we can find a way to be better for the girls, if nothing else." Tasha smiled softly, her heart light. "We'll be fine, Malcolm. We don't need to be the way we were. We just need to move forward." There was another pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. "I hope you're right," he replied, his voice softer now. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. There was nothing left to fix. She had already fixed herself, and that was enough. Later that night, as the girls were getting ready for bed, Tasha stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Her life was no longer defined by the past, by the expectations of others, by a marriage that had long since fallen apart. She had come into her own, and it felt like freedom. She turned away from the window, a small smile playing at her lips. The world was still uncertain, but it was hers to shape now, and that was enough. The months that followed were a quiet kind of victory. Tasha's consulting business began to gain traction, and though it wasn't an overnight success, she could see the growth. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The work was fulfilling, but more than that, it was empowering. She felt herself transforming with every woman she helped, every conversation that led to a breakthrough, every piece of advice that made someone believe in themselves just a little bit more. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always glamorous. There were long nights, late emails, and moments of doubt, but she had always known that the best things weren't built quickly. They took time, effort, and patience, and she was finally giving all of those things to herself. The girls were adjusting well, their smiles coming more easily now. The tension that had been in the air for so long had finally started to dissipate. They still had their moments of uncertainty, the occasional question about their dad or about how things used to be. But they also had moments of joy, moments that had nothing to do with the past but everything to do with the future. Tasha made sure of it. She made sure they saw that it was okay to be happy again. She was showing them what it looked like to choose yourself, to build the life you want, even when it feels like the world is telling you it's too late. One evening, as Tasha was finishing up work, she heard a knock on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she went to answer it with a curious frown. When she opened the door, there stood Malcolm, looking hesitant but determined. He had changed in ways Tasha hadn't expected. The man standing before her wasn't the one who had shut her out, the one who had withdrawn emotionally. This Malcolm seemed aware of his mistakes, aware of the changes they both had gone through. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "About everything, about how I've been and how I treated you." Tasha raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. She wasn't angry anymore. She was calm, her heart steady. She had come to peace with what had happened, with the way things had turned out. This was his moment to speak, and she wasn't going to interrupt it. "I've messed up," he continued, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. And I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I know that's not possible, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. Tasha looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, searching for sincerity. She had been waiting for an apology like this for so long, but now it didn't feel like it mattered as much. She had already forgiven him in her own way without needing him to say the words. I appreciate that, Malcolm, she said finally, her voice steady. But I'm not the same person I was when we first got married. I'm not the same person I was even a year ago. I've moved forward, and so have you, in your own way. And that's okay, Malcolm nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I don't expect us to be the same, he said. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see what you've been building. I see what you've done. And I'm proud of you. Tasha felt a quiet satisfaction at those words. It wasn't about him trying to fix everything. It wasn't about him trying to win her back. It was about understanding. About finally seeing each other for who they truly were, not who they had once hoped they would be. I've always seen you, Malcolm, she said softly, but it took me a long time to see myself, and that's where I am now. I'm happy with who I am, and I'm happy with where I'm going. Malcolm's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time there was a sense of peace between them. They had both moved forward in their own ways. They had both changed, and in doing so they had found their own paths. I'm glad, he said quietly, looking at her with a small smile. I'm glad you're happy. With that, he turned to leave. Tasha stood at the door, watching him go, feeling the weight of the years fall away with each step he took. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't need to. She had her girls, her business, her peace, and that was enough. The days became easier, softer, filled with a quiet contentment that Tasha hadn't known for a long time. She had done the hard work not just of rebuilding her life but of finding herself again. The last few years had been filled with so much noise, expectations, disappointments, the constant push and pull of trying to hold everything together. But now there was silence. Not the kind that was filled with grief, but the kind that comes when you've let go of what no longer serves you and embraced the peace that comes with change. Tasha spent her days helping women take charge of their own futures, showing them what it meant to invest in themselves, to build something they could be proud of. She wasn't just teaching business strategies or career advice. She was teaching them how to reclaim their lives, how to find their voices when they had been silenced by everyone else. Her daughters were thriving. Tasha made sure to spend time with them, making memories instead of just trying to survive. They were no longer walking on eggshells, no longer fearful of the change that had rocked their world. They were happy again, their laughter returning to the house as it had once been, a true reflection of their mother's newfound strength. Malcolm continued to live in the guest room, but there were no more awkward moments or tense silences. He was still a part of their lives, but in a different way. He was no longer the person who defined her happiness, and Tasha had accepted that. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and sometimes real is enough. One afternoon, after a long day of client calls and meetings, Tasha sat down at her desk, flipping through some paperwork. Her phone buzzed on the table, the name Mia flashing on the screen. She smiled and picked it up. Hey, girl, Mia's voice came through, as upbeat as ever. How's everything going? Tasha leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off her shoulders. It's going good, really good actually. I'm making progress with the business and the girls are doing great. I think I'm finally at peace, Mia, like really at peace. I'm so proud of you, Mia said, her voice full of warmth. You've come so far. You deserve this. Tasha smiled, the first true smile that had come easily in years. I've learned a lot about myself in the past year. It's been hard, but it's been worth it. They chatted for a while longer, talking about life, work, and the future. Tasha felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had stuck by her side, especially Mia. She realized that her journey wasn't just about rebuilding her life. It was about building the support system she had always needed. Later that evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Tasha stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at the dark sky. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely quiet. It was a peaceful one, one that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. She had let go of the things that had weighed her down, the things that had made her doubt her worth. She had learned that silence didn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes silence was strength. Sometimes it was the space you needed to rebuild, to grow, and to find your way. As she turned away from the window, she felt a soft presence behind her. It was the girls, still awake, quietly standing in the doorway. Tasha smiled and walked over to them. "What's up, sweethearts?" she asked, kneeling down to their level. "Mama," Jada said softly, "are we okay now?" Tasha's heart swelled. "Yes, baby, we're okay. Everything is going to be okay." They all hugged her tightly, and for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt the full weight of everything she had worked for. She wasn't perfect, and life wasn't perfect, but it was enough. She had her daughters, she had herself, and together they were going to be just fine. Tasha knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Life wasn't a straight line, and there would be bumps along the way, but she also knew that she was ready. She had faced the hardest things, losing herself, finding herself, and letting go of what no longer served her. And now she was ready to embrace whatever came next, with her head held high and her heart open. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already proven it to herself. If you found strength in Tasha's journey, take a moment to reflect on your own path. Life is full of challenges, but just like Tasha, you have the power to rebuild, to choose your own happiness, and to embrace the future with confidence. Don't wait for the perfect moment, take that first step today. If you resonated with Tasha's story, share your thoughts below and let us know what part of her journey inspired you the most. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need a reminder that they're stronger than they think. Because you are never alone in your journey. We're all in this together.